Good morning. My name is Erica Cunningham, and I'm the Vice President of Community Engagement for Metro, the best transit system in the country. The first session on the stage is titled, Seeing is Believing, American Hoax and Scams, with David Barron and Leah Sotilli. Barron is formerly a science correspondent for NPR and has also written for the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, Los Angeles Times, and other publications. While conducting research for The Martians, his new book, he has served as the Baruch S. Bloomberg NASA Library of Congress Chair in Astrobiology at the library's John W. Kluge Center. Sotilli is a journalist, podcast host, and the author of 2 books. Her journalism has been published by the Washington Post, the New York Times Magazine, Rolling Stone, and High Country Times Magazine, where she is a correspondent. She will discuss her latest, Blazing Eye Sees All, Love Has Won, False Prophets, and the Fever Dream of the American New Age. The session will be moderated by Frederick Weary, a professor of sociology at Princeton University, who is currently writing a book that examines the rise of mass debt. Thank you for joining us at the National Book Festival in person or via C-SPAN, and let's welcome them to the stage.
Thank you, Erica. I'm Fred Weary. I will serve as your moderator today for our discussion with David and Leah. We'll chat for about half an hour or so, and then we'll open the room up for discussion. There are 2 microphones here at the front. And so we don't have much time, so we're going to just jump right into it. As I read these books, I kept thinking to myself, you know, these people should have known better. And it is a hopeful thought. But when you see David's title, and I'm going to read the title so that you understand why I had this sort of notion in my head, The Martians, the true story of an alien craze that captured turn-of-the-century America, you think maybe it's just a small segment of the population, you know, this must be some fringe thing that's happening here in America at turn of century. But David says no. It is a 1906, you open with this 1906 New York Times article, There is Life on Mars. You note that this is followed by Wall Street Journal coverage and the major newspapers. This was not some fringe idea. How in the world did this happen?
How in the world, indeed. Well, that's why I wrote the book, because, you know, when I grew up in the 60s, Martians were a staple of science fiction, right? I mean, Mars has been part of our collective imagination, certainly as long as I've been alive. And when I started to look at newspapers from the beginning of the 20th century, and to read in the Wall Street Journal, the end of 1907, the Wall Street Journal, one of the most conservative, serious newspapers, said the big news of 1907 was the proof of intelligent human life on Mars. How in the world, indeed? Well, I'll briefly sum it up. It came from the science of the era. Mars, we all know today from seeing the pictures beamed back by the rovers that were sent there by NASA, Mars is a desolate landscape. But back in the 19th century, all we knew about Mars was what we could see through earthbound telescopes, a planet that's at its closest 35 million miles away. So through a telescope that's looking through the Earth's atmosphere, which distorts the image, astronomers were trying to make sense of what they could see on the surface, and they were seeing dark areas and light areas that looked like oceans and continents. But some astronomers were also seeing these straight lines, this network of what looked like artificially straight lines that an Italian astronomer thought were water channels of some sort, and he called them canali, which in Italian means channels, but that was mistranslated into English as canals. And that started in 1877, and people knew it was a mistranslation. But the main character in my book is an American astronomer named Percival Lowell, who came along in 1894 and said they are canals, not for navigation, but for irrigation. And it was Percival Lowell, who was an erudite, intelligent man, a best-selling author, one of the most, a wealthy man from one of the most respected families in New England, when he established an observatory and came up with a theory that these were irrigation canals. He ended up convincing the American public that that was true.
The scientific community. Meanwhile, there are religious communities, Aaliyah, and in Blazing Eye Sees All, there are moments I was kind of reaching for the little hair that I have, because there are people who they're losing their 401ks, they are investing in this vision of their spiritual guru, and then it's too late. Money's gone, lives are upturned. Can you tell us a little bit about at least one of the Mother God? I love her name. And why was she so good at getting people to invest in her vision?
I mean, this is a question I was asking as I was writing this book, because I found Amy Carlson, who is the leader of this group, Love Has Won, and called herself Mother God. I found her to be a very uncharismatic person, but that was certainly not the case. There were lots of people who she appealed to. She really started to put herself out there within online New Age circles, specifically talking about astrology and giving, forecasts of what the stars were saying. And she would, put her links out there on Facebook. She would put them in conspiracy theory forums and truther forums about 9/11 and vaccines and all kinds of different things. And it really appealed to people, a wide group of people. And I think what was, what I could deduce through the reporting, what was so appealing is that she was just offering an alternative, a new answers that people wanted. I think that she was good at speaking to a lack that people felt and saying, I know that you have questions. I have answers. If you, give me a little money, or if you come and move in with me in Colorado, I can show you how we can ascend to a greater dimension or a greater, plane of thought. It sounds really bonkers. I understand that as I say that, we have these words, they're not my words, they're her words. But I think that, there was a broad appeal. It wasn't just people who were, had mental illness or something like that. It was people who had experienced job loss, who had experienced family loss, addiction, you name the crisis. Those people found in her a soothing guru that they had direct access to, and she offered answers. And sometimes it's just that simple. Someone saying, I have clean answers for your messy problems.
Yes. And speaking of people who can offer answers, David, it's not often that I read a book and someone's getting human skin mailed to them as a gift. In the context
of me.
But you discovered it, right? I mean, you saw it and you wrote about it, and you have other people that who aren't quite so eccentric, who are mainstream financiers and well-known scientists. Can you talk a little bit about, just as Leah points out, there are a number of people who really wanted to believe in this?
Absolutely. So I think I should say something about the human skin in the mail. Well, then that's a story. Again, my book has a whole cast of characters. Percival Lowell, the American astronomer, is the main character, but he was influenced by a French astronomer named Camille Flammarion, who was kind of, I'm dating myself, but the Carl Sagan of his day. He was a serious scientist, but also a best-selling writer who wrote nonfiction and fiction. He had this mass following of great groupies, really. And one day he received a package in the mail that smelled sort of odd and felt kind of odd. And it was a note from a doctor saying that he had a young woman who was dying of tuberculosis, who made it her last wish that when she died, that the skin from her shoulders be mailed to Camille Flammarion so that he would bind his next book in her leather made from her skin. And I discovered, actually, he had several books bound from human skin. This was a not unknown practice in Victorian times, but this says something about how fanatical people can get. So Camille Flammarion believed in life on Mars. So did Percival Lowell. So did Alexander Graham Bell. And I think this speaks to what Leah was talking about. It's not just about who's selling these ideas, but why do we buy them? And you know, I think Alexander Graham Bell was being swayed by the fact that there were serious folks like Percival Lowell, who was taken seriously. But I think a lot of folks were, you know, Camille Flammarion wasn't just an astronomer. He believed that, in fact, life on Mars might have been the souls of dead humans, that's where we go when we die. And this belief in the afterlife is something we all want to believe, whether we do or not. That was part of his appeal and Lowell's appeal.
I think it's interesting that you keep saying, wanted to believe. I think we were talking earlier about that quote from the X-Files, I want to believe. And that was something that came up so much in the reporting of my book, like, you know, people really having, you know, reality in front of their faces, but truly wanting to believe in something that was extraordinary, or that they had some kind of personal power, or that their guru contained some knowledge. I think that that's a very American thing. It's something that, you know, has been through our history. It's just really wanting to believe something is true.
And speaking of our history of belief, we have a tradition of religious freedom. And so as I'm reading these New Age gurus, and you have people who are, maybe they're exercising free will, maybe they're victims of fraud. How do you know? And how does it get resolved sometimes, even by the courts and the cases that you follow in your book?
Yeah, one group that really took hold of my imagination and interest was a group that was around in the 1920s and 30s and into the 40s in California called the I Am Activity. They had outposts all over the country. But this group found itself in the court system in the 1940s because they were accused of defrauding people through the mail, of saying, you know, buy these things and they'll cure your blindness. And, you know, there were people who sued the government sued them, and then there were people testifying in court saying, I'm still blind and I took their cures. That landed in the Supreme Court in 1944. And it was a really interesting case to examine because the court decided, you know, we should not be in the business of deciding what people can and can't believe, how real their belief is. There was a thing that, you know, came out of this case called this, you know, how sincerely held beliefs are. If people hold beliefs and they sincerely believe that they're real, who's the court to say that that's true or not? The dissenting opinions were very fiery on this case, and saying, you know, if we let this go through, then we are going to say it's okay to just basically essentially grift people. And I think that case created a precedent that we are seeing play out big time right now in this moment of grifters and people claiming to have knowledge that is often not true.
Yes. But, you know, we can see that happening in religious communities, and you can say, oh, I understand how that can happen. It's freedom of religion. People believe what they want to believe. Scientists, wait a minute. So why is it, David, that the scientists who have a community that they're supposed to be testing hypotheses and they're supposed to be verifying each other's work, and they're a tough crowd, how is it that they didn't stop this alien craze? That they didn't sort of say, this is, you know, shut it down right away. What happened?
Well, some did try to shut it down, but I think I'm a great believer in science. I think that science in the long run moves us toward truth, but that's not to say we don't go down side avenues that are maybe not so truthful. Science eventually self-corrects, at least we hope that that's the case. But getting back to what I said before, we're talking about an era when all we knew about Mars was what you could see through a telescope from the surface of the Earth. So astronomers were trying to make sense of what they were seeing. Well, you had some folks like Percival Lowell who said, well, And so Percival Lowell, who established his own observatory in Flagstaff, Arizona, it's still there today, on a prominence that he called Mars Hill. He studied Mars more assiduously than anyone. He made Mars his personal obsession. So when he, after studying Mars night after night, whenever Mars made its close approach for years, and he drew these elaborate maps of Mars, and in these maps showed a network of fine straight lines that intersected at places where there were these circles. And he said the lines were the irrigation canals and the circles were the cities. You had other astronomers who were looking at Mars and said, I don't see that. I don't see all those lines. I don't see those cities. But they weren't studying Mars all the time. So Percival Lowell could say, well, you're not studying it well enough. Your eyesight isn't good enough. Your telescope isn't good enough. You didn't situate your observatory under an atmosphere that's steady enough where you could see the surface of Mars. It's hard to prove a negative. And I think this is true in Leah's book as well. When someone says that, they're speaking to angels or to some long lost soul, and someone else says, well, I'm not speaking to them, you can say, well, you don't have the gift. And that's really what Percival Lowell was saying. So there were plenty of scientists who were against him, but he was a very good salesman. He was a popular speaker, a best-selling author. And so he started to bring the public along with him, even as many in the scientific community disagreed with him.
And this helps me understand better what we do when we really want to believe something. And because across the two books, everyone's thinking about something that goes well beyond the human experience. An experience with the Martians, with the divine. And whenever I think about this, I usually think about it in terms of like a very happy, love. This is why you find love in some of the names of these groups. Very happy, lovely, kumbaya kind of as its origins. But Leah, you kind of uncover a very sort of unpleasant, hateful side in terms of some of the founding stories. Can you talk a little bit about what that is?
Yeah, I have to say, when I wrote this book, I was explicitly trying to give myself a project that divorced itself from a lot of the other work that I've done about extremism and, hateful ideologies. And here I'm doing the research into the New Age and finding myself right back in the same place. So which is, a little bit of a bummer, but for me, it was interesting to learn the way that I assemble the narrative in the book is how ideas have been passed from generation to generation. And what I found was that the New Age has real roots in racial, in racism back into the age of spiritualism. I write a lot about a woman named Helena Blavatsky, and she created a system of what she called root races. It's essentially a racial hierarchy, and where the Aryans are seen as the most advanced race. This gets picked up and taken by the next generation. So there's this undercurrent of racism, but really a virulent strain of anti-Semitism that goes back to the origins of the New Age and that continues today. And I found that to be, very surprising because what I knew is that, love and light and, loose clothes and yoga and, no makeup and things being, nice and free. But it's specifically the group that kind of assembles the spine of the book, Love Has Won, led by Mother God and Amy Carlson, a virulently anti-Semitic group. And I was trying to reconcile in my mind, how do you call yourself love and also say, yeah, but not for everyone, that there's this, and I think the answer to that is that many of these groups believe in these ideas that there are these dark forces kind of puppeteering things behind the scenes, and that cabal or a new world order and things like that. That was surprising for me to learn because that's something, I was coming off years of writing about anti-government militia groups, and that's something that you hear about with those groups. So to me, this book ended up being an answer to that idea you hear. If you get far enough to the left or far enough to the right, the ideas start to sound the same. To me, this was like, oh, okay, this is the intersection, is these ideas.
And David, you weren't finding that, thankfully. So talk about what you saw instead. You seem to be on the brighter side of the moon.
Well, right. So, I mean, I would like to believe in the Martians because, you know, probably the best known piece of literature to come out of the era that I write about, this period of Mars craze in the 1890s and the first part of the 20th century, was H.G. Wells's The War of the Worlds, in which the Martians were these hideous creatures that came to Earth to conquer the planet. But that was not the widely held view of the supposedly real Martians of the time. The Martian civilization was this egalitarian, moral, highly evolved civilization that by the time, I mean, you mentioned, 1906, the New York Times proclaiming life on Mars, 1907, the Wall Street Journal. By 1908, you had pastors sermonizing about the Martians and how we should emulate them because they had evolved into this peaceful planet. And that's why people wanted to believe, because here was this better world right next door that showed perhaps there was hope for us here. And in fact, if we could just communicate with the Martians, maybe they would teach us how to be a better world. And again, I think there's a lot of resonance. But so there wasn't that same dark side that there was. That's not to say, of course, we all know there is no civilization on Mars, which is a great shame. But the people who want to create a civilization on Mars, what do they say? We're going to start over. We're going to create a new, better civilization on Mars. Well, 100 years ago, we were kidding ourselves when we believed there was a better civilization on Mars. Are we kidding ourselves to think if we bring humans to Mars, we're going to leave human problems behind on Earth? I think perhaps.
Ooh. So does that mean that we should rethink the word hoax?
Well, actually, when I was first put on this panel and I saw the word hoax, I was a little uncomfortable because Percival Lowell and the people who promoted the idea of Martians really believed it. So I don't know that I would use the word hoax. Clearly, he misled people. And I wonder, Leo, the folks that you write about, to what extent do you think they are intentionally kidding people, or are they true believers?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely true believers. I think that I've done enough work interviewing religious studies scholars at this point who study new religious movements, what we would all call cults. And a lot of those folks would tell me as I was doing my reporting, it's really not a great idea to interrogate whether someone's deeply held belief is real or not to them, if their religious experience is real or not, if it's provable. So yeah, I agree with you. The word hoax is a little hard for me to wrap my head around if you embrace that people's religious experience is authentic and real to them. Having said that, a big part of what I'm thinking as you're speaking is about how I talk a lot in the book about lost civilizations, the civilization of Atlantis, the civilization of Lemuria. These are ideas that really undergird a lot of the New Age movement that are scientifically just not real. A continent, I'm sorry to say, cannot sink into the ocean and just be lost. It's not true. But in a way, that doesn't matter for people who believe that there was once a civilization that was spiritually enlightened, beautiful, and great. It's a touchstone, like Mars,
like the Martians,
to say, we could get back to that if we can just spiritually elevate all of humanity up to a different vibration.
Yeah, I mean, until I read your book, I never heard of Lemuria, this supposedly lost continent, but it has a lot of resonance with the ideas about Mars. And it also was from the 19th century.
Right, yeah. And these ideas even are so fascinating to me, how this idea of the Lemuria being this lost civilization where everything was once great, that idea can be taken from generation to generation and just tweaked a little bit to fit the belief system or fit the ideas that someone is pushing, and say, well, just look at Lemuria. That's where people had a third eye and they could see things a little differently.
And when you're doing this work, Leah, it fascinates me when you're having to talk to people who most of us might consider to be extreme in their viewpoints. and you're getting them to open up to you, that's not easy to do. And sometimes, you're knocking on doors that get slammed. So can you talk a little bit about how you did the research for this book?
Yeah, I mean, it was difficult in a lot of ways because you're really having to. I mean, I think the key to reporting on extremism is to arrive without judgment, and you're trying to understand. These are really people's beliefs, so you have to really, kind of put your own aside and ask why they believe what they believe. This did present a lot of, very interesting and difficult interviews. I'm thinking specifically of one person that I spoke to who became a follower of Love Has Won and said, I was appealed to them because they were anti-Semites and so am I. And so that was part of the selling point. That was one of those interviews where it's like, oh, wow, okay, you're really telling me that. But, you see, like, I'm going to write it down. I'm a journalist. But I think, it's important to examine hateful things. I think that in media, we have long had a history of saying that's just the fringe. We don't need to think about that. Well, I think that, our modern times show us that it's important to examine why people feel appealed to the fringe. And when you have masses of people following some of the people in my book, I think, many of the women that I write about that become gurus or spiritual leaders, they were written about in the New York Times and in, the largest media in the world and seen as real freaks of the fringe. I think what I'm trying to understand is why were they so appealing to so many people? And I think that that's the question a lot of reporters haven't asked is instead of just maligning people, why don't we just say, okay, why is this appealing? And, obviously there's varied answers to that.
And I'm also thinking now, too, that talking to the living is very different than communing with the dead, which is exactly what David does in the archives. So tell us a little bit about that process of the archival work.
Well, so, I spent most of my career as a journalist, and I could, if I was doing a story, I would call people up on the phone and ask them questions. But writing about history, you can't do that. And so first there's the challenge of just trying to piece together a story after more than a century. But even harder is understanding people's motivations and their beliefs. And that was true of Percival Lowell, my main character, who, I read pretty much everything he'd ever written, certainly that was published, but I went into archives, I read all of his correspondence. There's one extant diary that was helpful. But to get inside someone's head who's no longer living is difficult, but also to understand the belief system of the people at the time, you're looking for those nuggets. And so why did people want to believe in the Martians, right? Well, in 1909, there was this wonderful newspaper article that was published in a number of newspapers. This was a time when there was discussion of communicating with the Martians. There were a whole bunch of schemes that were being discussed about how we could get in touch with the Martians. And there was this article, questions Mars might answer. And a whole list of questions. Well, you would think it would be practical questions. How do you build canals, right? Or the Wright brothers were working at that time. And the Martians were supposedly more advanced than us. How do you perfect the airplane? No, these were the questions the Martians were going to answer. What is the meaning of life? Where does the soul go when you die? How can we prevent human suffering? The Martians were becoming stand-ins for God. This was a time when science had been undermining traditional religion for centuries, from Galileo and Copernicus to Newton to Darwin. And here you had science, well, I'll put that in quotes, but Percival Lowell, an astronomer, who was giving people back these supernatural beings, these advanced beings, who as soon as we get in touch with them, they're going to answer life's deepest mysteries. And that really clicked for me about why the public so wanted to believe in the Martians.
And this brings us to today, in a moment in which there are so many polarities. There are people who believe in the science of vaccines, and there are people who don't believe in the science of vaccines. And there are other things that sort of bubble up, really contentious. How do your books help us make sense of these modern scientific and social controversies in our contemporary lives?
Well, I guess I would say I think skepticism is great. I believe in skepticism. But we should be skeptical of everyone, including ourselves. If we, the way the human mind works, we can very easily fool ourselves into believing things that we want to believe. So we need to interrogate ourselves and others. And I think one of the hallmarks of true science is that it evolves. That a true scientist will say, well, the evidence supports something for now, and then when the evidence changes, they might change their mind. If a belief is held so firmly that it never changes, even when new evidence comes in, I think that's a reason for extra skepticism.
I think there is quite a lot of science and science skepticism in the book that I wrote. But one thing I came to understand is like New Age beliefs often are an alternative to other spiritual belief systems that might feel more mainstream. There is an anti-science vibe, to use the parlance of the New Age, with it, where people really have a lot of skepticism. One thing that I talk about quite a bit in the book is a substance called colloidal silver, which is marketed among New Age circles and has been for quite some time as a cure-all. There are people in this book that are poisoned by colloidal silver, and I think that this is a great anecdote to talk about when we talk about scientific skepticism, because if you drink enough colloidal silver, you will turn blue. And there are several blue people in this book. And I think that that's a great way to understand how, within the New Age, there's a lot of people saying, like, don't trust what the experts tell you. Trust what I'm telling you. Whoops, sorry. Trust what I'm telling you about this substance. Take this substance. Don't go to the hospital. Don't go to doctors. This will cure you. That goes very, very poorly for people in this book. So I think that mostly I was concerned with the ways that personal anecdotes can be very powerful for people. Well, my aunt or my mother says this will cure you, so just listen to me. I think that that's fine on a personal level, right? We all have a great aunt or a great mom that gives us great advice. When we start to rise that skepticism up to a systemic level where that applies to everyone, I think that that is something we all really need to question. So I think that, personal power and a little light skepticism, I think it's a good thing when it concerns our systems, but I don't know about broad brush solutions.
And speaking of questioning, you get to do it now. So there are two microphones here. I will point to you and have you ask your question. Please try to be economical in your questions so that everyone can have a say. And I'll go sort of left, right, kind of. So first here.
Question for Leah. In the 1990s, I had the opportunity to have dinner several times with Claire Prophet, who is the leader of the Church Universal and Triumphant in Gardner, Montana. They preached that nuclear Armageddon was coming. The thing that struck me about spending time with her was we had dinner at her home, which was quite opulent. It was on a big ranch in Montana. And I'm curious, the financial element, it sounds like some of the people you talked with are essentially grifting. How do they justify this idea that they get financial benefit from this whole system?
Well, I'm delighted to hear that you met Elizabeth Clare Prophet. She takes up a big real estate in this book and is a fascinating person to me. I think the best way to answer your question is to refer you to another guru, thinker in the book named J.Z. Knight. She lives in Washington State currently. She channels a 35,000-year-old Lemurian warrior named Ramtha, who tells people, how to fix their problems. At one point, Ramtha told J.Z. Knight, "You need to start charging money because this takes a lot of toll on your body. And so that's the story that Jay-Z Knight tells, is that, well, Ramtha told me I need to start charging money, so that's why I live in an opulent ranch in Washington State. I would imagine the same would be the case for Elizabeth Clare Prophet. So there's always a spirit that's going to tell you that it's okay to charge a lot of money, and so that would be my answer.
I love that spirit.
I need to have that spirit.
Yeah. No, I think it's fascinating that we talk about these crazy fringe beliefs that some odd group believe in, but aren't we the fringe? I mean, most people believe in ancient texts and supernatural beings and ghosts and angels, and really that's the mainstream belief. The people who question that kind of are the fringe, right?
I talk a bit in my book about a survey that Chapman University does each year, and it's a survey of American fears. And it talks about all the things that people are most afraid of. And at one point they included other questions in there about how many people believe in Sasquatch, how many people believe in aliens, how many people believe in ghosts and lost civilizations. And I think you're right, there's a lot of people who hold those beliefs. So I think it's possible to be a very logical, scientifically minded person and also nurture beliefs like that. So I would agree with you that survey at least showed a cross section of America really does believe in those things. And I don't think it means, if you believe in ghosts, maybe you live in a haunted house. That doesn't make you an extremist. It probably does make you fairly mainstream.
No, I didn't mean just ghosts. I mean like God,
sure.
Heaven.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, and the belief in aliens, there are a lot of, the universe is enormous, hundreds of billions of galaxies, each containing hundreds of billions of stars. And we now know that most stars have planets around them. It's hard to believe there aren't aliens. But the question is, have they come here? Or are they on the planet next door and have they built a canal building civilization? But you raise a very good point.
I went to an elementary school named after Percival Lowell, so this is really interesting to hear about him. I didn't actually know any of this.
Where's the elementary school?
In Seattle. It's called Lowell Elementary, yeah.
I didn't know that.
My question is more for Leah, but also for both of you. You mentioned, Leah, earlier that many people find themselves in these new religious movements after crises because they are seeking clean answers to messy problems. Do you think that anybody can get swept up in one of these movements with the right combination of circumstances, or are there certain personality traits or dispositions that make certain people more susceptible? Like, I can't imagine myself draining a 401k for a guru, but do I just need like the right crisis and the right guru?
Yeah, I think the answer is, I think really anybody can be recruited to one of these groups. I think Elizabeth Clare Prophet, who we talked about earlier, who ran the Church Universal and Triumphant in Montana, that's a great example. Many, if not most of her followers were very educated people, PhDs. People came from around the world to be with her. So I think it's really about the personal power that they were offering. I think the New Age is so attractive to people because it says, you don't need, a religious man to tell you what to believe. You have the personal power inside you. And if you give me a little money, I'll show you how to conjure that and believe in yourself. So absolutely, I think that's what makes the New Age so attractive. Is it's the power is in you.
Well, I might say before I wrote my book, I would have thought, well, that somehow education and intelligence would make you more immune to being swept up. Well, Percival Lowell was one of the most well-educated, he was clearly intelligent man. That does not make you immune to getting swept up in crazy ideas. In fact, sometimes it can enhance it. We're all prone to confirmation bias, to selecting evidence that supports our preconceived ideas and dismissing everything else. There was a point at which Percival Lowell's theory was that these canals were bringing, these irrigation canals were bringing water from the North and South Pole, the polar ice caps, down to desert farms and cities. And at one point, his theory was that in the spring, in the northern hemisphere, the meltwater would come all the way down to the equator and go south into the southern hemisphere. And then the other half of the year, the south polar water, as it melted, would come north into the northern hemisphere, which means that the water flowed both ways in the same canals, which you would think would suggest that the theory was bunk. But no, Percival Lowell, being a highly intelligent and clever man, said, no, it's proof that there's life on Mars because they must pump the water. That's how it can go in both directions. And sometimes it's the intelligent mind that is extra good at fooling oneself. So I suspect a lot of the people who get caught up in the movement you write about, it's not suggesting they're stupid.
Right.
That has nothing to do with whether you believe these ideas.
Thank you. Thank you.
To what extent do you think what's currently playing out with AI is analogous to some of these like beliefs and hoaxes in the sense of people who believe that AI provides like spiritual truth? Do you think that there are parallels? And then if so, what do you think the implications are of that?
I haven't thought about that at all, but I think that you're on the phone there. I just admit to you, yeah, I'm actually very curious about that. Sorry.
That's an excellent question. I mean, I haven't heard that much about it, but I can see it happening. Again, I mean, people talk about AI being smarter than all of us combined. That sounds a lot like a god to me.
Like the questions to ask a Martian are a lot of the questions people are asking
right,
AI
exactly.
now. Is, what is the purpose
Yeah,
of life?
we should feed that list of questions into ChatGPT and see what.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm short. A lot of belief in these theories, such as aliens or like the Lumerians, is based on the fact it's like a small scale, like it's the truth that's being hidden from you. It's elites aren't telling this. It's against the mainstream scientific consensus. As we see these ideas, such as anti-vax, become mainstreamed into the highest halls of power, do you think that they're going to maybe the sway on them will change because that kind of niche idea is going to start going away? Or do you think we're just going to get conspiracy theories based off conspiracy theories?
I mean, this is something I think about a lot in that, for the last decade, my journalism has all been about what we would call extremism. And now extremism is, like you say, it's becoming mainstream. I think, I can answer this sort of from what I think would be a proper media perspective, which is to not allow ideas that are based in hate to become mainstream ideas. That's just, that's the job of journalists, I think, is to understand what the origins of these ideas are and how they evolve and are used over time. But also to just look to evidence. I have a particular thing in my mind. So just last night I was reading the news and seeing how we're talking about sending troops to Portland where there's chaos. I live in Portland, Oregon. I will tell you, there is no chaos. There is no chaos happening. But these are things that get repeated and they would get repeated by mainstream media, and then they become real, right? This is what when we go to look through archives, this is what we see headlines. Important for keepers of history, for chroniclers of history, to always be able to say, this idea may have been talked about in loud ways, but it didn't make it more true.
Well, just to bounce off what you were saying, I mean, a lot of it has to do with the role of the media, and today that also means social media, which can enhance some of these ideas, and that's I think what can take fringe ideas and make them mainstream, and that played a role with the Martians too. It was the rise of what at the time was called yellow journalism. Today we would call tabloid journalism, but often it's the most sensational ideas that take off, or the ideas that people really want to believe that take off. So I don't know what's going to happen if the fringe becomes mainstream, but our communications technologies and a lot of people who are pushing ideas tend to push the more extreme ideas than the more sober ones.
Can you say a little bit about the accessibility of the sober ideas? Because I sit on a campus. I'm not a natural scientist, but I have lots of natural scientist friends, and as they talk about things that are very exciting for them, it's a slow burn excitement, and so you would have to have been in those debates, and you would have to have been really deep in that literature to understand that this is something that takes 5, 7, 10 years to figure out. And meanwhile, we're in a social media environment in which you're getting like quick, exciting ideas. So how do we see the scientific community being able to kind of hold, it holds, thankfully, but hold in a way that the public understands what it's holding?
Well, I mean, I've been a science journalist for 40 years, and I find, getting people to pay attention to scientific ideas, you have to go where people's minds are. We all care much more about human stories than anything else. And I think scientists have to be good at communicating in a way to keep the public's attention. I mean, now I've written a book about Martians because, that is a compelling idea. But I'm hoping that even writing about something that some would see as sensationalistic, it's an avenue for me to unearth serious ideas, but in a context that's more palatable, more interesting to a broader public. And I think, one of the things that scientists should probably be learning when they're getting their PhDs is how to communicate better. It's very hard to communicate the truth, which can be boring, against sensationalistic ideas that aren't true but get the people's attention.
So we interrogated the word hoax, but Leah, you raised the other word in the panel title, which is American. So I'd like to hear from both of you if you feel the phenomena you're writing about are culturally American in a specific way.
I only looked at America, so it's hard for me to say, well, in other places, I'm aware that the New Age has its own flavor in every culture. I think that I was particularly interested in the ways that the New Age seemed to ebb and flow at certain times. So the one impetus for me writing the book was 2020. I'm sitting at home, I'm looking at Instagram, and I'm seeing all of a sudden crystals are being sold by, people, and people I know are getting them, and tarot cards are everywhere. So I was curious about what was behind that, and what I started to see was that when the New Age really has had a surge, as at times of great political upheaval, a lot of uncertainty, war, crises. So certainly I can say, there have been big moments in American history where this, back to the 1850s, where this has really surged. And, a lot of the reporting I did on the early days of the New Age was after the Civil War, when people really, there was just great decimation of the American public, and so many families trying to understand how to cope with the loss, and seeking spiritualists who would offer a way to talk to their, relative that they lost. So there's, there's this, the book that I wrote is steeped in American culture.
Well, I think time and place are really important. I mean, similar for my book, it wasn't just the United States that went crazy for Mars. It also was Western Europe. I can't speak to the rest of the non-Western world. But I think it speaks to the time more than the place. We talk about the late 19th century as the Gilded Age, and it sounds wonderful, but it actually was a very unsettling time. There was great labor unrest in the United States. There was terrorism in Europe. There were bombings of cafes in Europe. The anarchists were on the rise. Heads of state were being assassinated. William McKinley was assassinated by an anarchist in 1901. There was a real feeling that society was unspooling. And so to believe that there was a better place on the planet next door, I think that when Percival Lowell was planting seeds in very fertile ground at that time in the United States, but also in Western Europe. So I think time and place are really important for how these ideas take hold.
Hi, my question is, at what point does extremism and these fringe ideas become unavoidable because of the human condition and our desire for something greater or to be humbled, and how do we sort of avoid that?
Boy, that's a hard question. I think that skepticism is a very, is a great thing to be able to apply. I think that oftentimes extreme ideas are pushed by people who are trying to make money. And so I think that, if people are charging, that's one way to sort of say, this might be a little out there. I mean, I don't know that extremist ideas become inevitable. I think that they are always there, and it's something, I mean, to me, when I think about the vast gamut of extremist ideas I've looked at over the years, there's always someone being blamed, and I think that that's something that we as just, primates, we want to blame someone for our problems or some group. And so I think that, my reporting has shown that, the human experience is never that clean. It's not always one group of people's fault. So I guess that's just where my mind goes.
Well, and I might actually ask Leah a question based on that, but I think that we all hunger for spirituality. I believe, and maybe not now, but at some point in your life. And I've seen that there are fewer and fewer Americans who belong to traditional religions, and I wonder if that's playing a role. If you're not raised in some religious environment, you grow up and suddenly you have some existential crisis, and if you can't fall back on your church or your synagogue or your mosque, does that maybe lead people
Absolutely.
to
Yeah, I think
these
so.
other?
Yeah. I mean, I live in the Northwest, which is, often talked about as the most unchurched region in the country. Yeah. And, but I think that, there's been a big New Age history there. And I think that speaks to what you're saying. There's an alternative there where, someone may say, I'm not into religion, but I do look at tarot cards. So, I think that there's just and that's not extreme. I think that I always like to say that, the people that I wrote about in this book, I think they all came from a place of trying to understand or reckon with difficult human experiences. Where they took it, I think goes really extreme.
So David, during your talk, I was immediately reminded of like 1930s War of the Worlds mass panic, where within living memory, people all had suddenly believed that aliens were invading America and panicked. And I was curious whether like that was part of the same strain, like, people grew up as children hearing this in the news. And also, I guess more broadly, like, both of you, do you believe that like sort of ideas contrary to facts, we'll call them generously, can be counteracted, or are they like, once the genie's out of the bottle, is it always going to be coming back generationally in that way?
Good question. So to address what you said first, so as
So, folks, I don't know what happened that all of a sudden my computer was uh, like it got shut down. And so, my apologies, and I'm sorry for what happened. I don't know what is going on. Someone wants to sabotage everything for me. My house is in water, how I am giving this, I only know. And it is. I am in very, very bad shape. Whole night I was illegally droned, and insects were thrown at me. I don't know who are these terrorists, sitting in Montgomery County. I would request President Trump and AG Bondi to send the troops here and do the whole cleanup. I have been asking it for the cleanup as they did of Washington DC. And here are my two books. The first one is The Modern Mughal Mentality: New Strategies to Succeed in India and the Global Marketplace. And the second one is The Outbreak of a Monstrous Infection. So I don't know what happened, and that the thing is not working, and everything is convoluted. Just because I voted for President Trump and I am a Trump supporter, I'm also a Biden supporter, folks. So are we getting recognized by whom we vote, or what is going on? My whole family was killed in 2011 to 2015, and then in February my husband was killed. They did not do autopsy. They did not ask me for autopsy, and they say that it was a normal death. I feel it is not a normal death. Someone high up wants to show their power to me, but they cannot show their power. We are American citizens, and I'm trying to spread love and happiness. And yes, I am direct descendant of Prophet Abu Bakr Raziallah Anha, and so I have come from heaven, descended from heaven to spread love and happiness for everyone around the globe. Having said that, folks, now here are these two books. My books are not selling. My retirement fund of my husband has been confiscated, and I have sent all the papers. Let's see what happens. And the construction company took the photographs, and they haven't come, and there was mold everywhere. And because of the condominium association, now they say that you will not get blowers and all. So I don't know what is going on, and my laundry for past several months is not there. I have insurances for everything. So if one has insurance for everything, then do they get this kind of treatment? Just think about it. Does our president and first lady and all those high officials get this kind of treatment? I have to ask AG Bondi and President Trump and President Biden that do you see how everyday American has, my money was lost from my bank. I had to go there and then come back and just see, how much pain I took, for all this, to help help President Trump and President Biden to what is going on in here, and also how the system can be improved. Having said that, please go and buy my books. And for both these books, they were Amazon bestseller. This one was Amazon bestseller not only in USA but also in India, and hot number one new release in USA. And this one was Amazon bestseller. And I want these two books bring food to the table. I'm a widow and an orphan, so I would like you to help me in buying these books, and getting I want help to gain some revenue on this. And also, folks, I want a movie and a documentary to be made. So all those movie and documentary producers, please contact me at Dr.Afshan@afshanhashmi.com. Having said that, folks, now I will end this program, and I don't know what the gap came. I was doing live thing. I will not stop the gap. Having said that, cheers and bye bye.